Good afternoon, North Bay residents. My name is Jeff Beamish. I'm an air quality meteorologist here at Sonoma Technology.
And I am Patrick Zahn, also an air quality meteorologist.
And today we are talking about the Kincade fire, which you're looking at on your screen. This was an image from one of the alert wildfire cameras set up near that fire. This is Geyser Peak, roughly around 11 o'clock last night when this fire really began to exhibit explosive growth, coming very close to this camera perch. Patrick, why don't you go ahead and put up the time lapse? I believe this is from that same camera, that same vantage point, Geyser Peak. And this time lapse starting, I should say, around 9 o'clock in the evening and then continuing over the next couple of hours.
So we're going to talk a little bit about this rapid fire growth, the weather conditions that contributed to that rapid fire growth. We're also going to talk about the weather conditions and how they will impact smoke transport over the next couple of days. And then we're going to give an extended outlook on the forecast coming up for this weekend.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and show the GOES West satellite imagery. As it stands right now, and the last information that we have from CAL FIRE on the Kincade fire, 10,000 acres, no containment, a lot of evacuation notices being issued into northeastern Sonoma County, including the entire town of Geyserville. And you can really see the smoke plume quite well with this GOES West imagery. Patrick, point out, decipher, what's the smoke plume and what are the high clouds here on this picture?
Yeah, so it can get a little bit confusing with these visible satellite images. We've got a little bit of high cloud activity here over Northern California, but right around here you can see that there's smoke being generated from this fire currently. It's being blown from the east to the west offshore. So that's the dominant weather pattern that we're going to be talking about, is this offshore wind pattern that not only fueled the fire growth, but also transported this smoke off to the west.
Yeah, and I want to point out right now, some of that smoke may be impacting the communities of the Sea Ranch. This would be on the northern coast of Sonoma County. Also Stewart's Point. Those are two areas where air quality is likely diminished at the moment, with that smoke plume blowing from the east toward the west.
Right, so one image I want to bring up right now, it's called AirNow Tech Navigator. This also has a static GOES imagery up here. It also gives the fire location. I'm going to take the visible image off really quick. So now we've just got a map of the area. This red area right here is the fire perimeter and the area filled in. It's currently burning. The dots on here, I'm going to go back an hour. These are current air quality observations. You see a lot of green, so that's not really telling the whole story. Because there aren't a lot of monitors right around the fire, and as Jeff mentioned, downwind of that fire at Stewart's Point and Sea Ranch, which would be out here on the shore.
Yeah, and moderate air quality near Clear Lake at the moment. This was as of, I believe, 1 o'clock this afternoon, where they were experiencing that moderate air quality. Also important to point out that there are air quality there's only one air quality monitor, I should say, in Sonoma County, but I would imagine as we go through time here with this fire that the California Air Resources Board, we'll call them CARB for this podcast from here on out, that they'll probably be deploying some mobile monitors to kind of get a better representation of the air quality around Healdsburg and Geyserville and possibly towards Stewart's Point and the Sea Ranch.
Right. CARB and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District do a great job of deploying these mobile monitors during extreme events like this so that residents can get a better handle on what's the air quality in their area. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Actually, I'm going to show a loop right here of the smoke being produced by this fire. Now, this is a webcam that's at the top of St. Helena. Is that right?
Yeah, this is St. Helena, elevation about 4,000 feet. And our apologies if the loop is a little slow to load. This is a current image right now from St. Helena, looking off toward the west-northwest toward that fire. As you can imagine, there's a lot of traffic right now on the airalertwildfire.org website watching this fire. But nonetheless, you can see that a very extensive smoke plume that's stretching out, if my orientation is correct here, from the northeast toward the southwest.
Right. And another thing to note here is that you can see that the smoke is sort of confined to the lower 2/3 of this picture. That's because that's about the mixing height.
Yep.
So in air quality meteorology, we talk a lot about mixing heights because that will determine how far up in the atmosphere your pollutants are being mixed. So mixing height was about 3,000 feet. Is that about right?
Yeah, if we're taking this literally in St. Helena North, and again, that's a perch around 4,000 feet. So I would guesstimate around 3,000 feet for that mixing height. You get above 3,000 feet, and that's where the smoke really isn't there. But as we're heading into the nighttime hours, mixing heights drop. That settles the smoke down to the ground. We'll talk more about that coming up, where the smoke is ahead tonight. Patrick, go ahead and let's pull up the windy tab here, because this is going to show the conditions that led to the explosive wildfire growth that we had with the Kincade fire last night.
Right. So like I mentioned before, the dominant wind pattern for this episode was an offshore wind event. So I'm looking at surface pressure here, and we're looking at wind gusts too from the NAM model. This was earlier this morning at 3 a.m. So I'm going to zoom in a second, but the first thing I wanted to point out was this strong high pressure off to our northeast. And that's going to produce this offshore wind or offshore pressure gradient, which will generate these winds, which generally are going from northeast to southwest. So as I zoom in here, now I'm going to take off the pressure isobars, and now we're just looking at wind gusts at 3 a.m. this morning.
And this is model depicted wind gusts here. And I think it's really important to point out the difference in model world to reality. And what this is showing is around 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts in and around that area where the fire developed.
So one thing I want to point out is the actual wind observations that were taken at one station very near the fire. So this is near Pine Flat Road. And during this period, early this morning, the winds were sustained over 50 miles an hour. These are winds in miles per hour on the y-axis, with gusts up over 70 miles an hour. So this really helped the fire to spread rapidly. When I checked on the fire size last night at about 11 p.m., they were saying 400 acres. When I got up this morning, they were talking about 10,000 acres.
And that number was last updated at 7 o'clock this morning. Do want to point that out. So this fire could be much larger. Another thing I want to point out too with this site, and I believe this is the Healdsburg Hills weather station, which I believe is south of where the fire is.
South.
Okay, let's go to the relative humidity line here. I think this is really important to point out, because it's not only the wind that was driving this fire, but it's the fact that the atmosphere was so super dry. You know, you hear red flag warning on the news with the meteorologists on TV, or the National Weather Service talking about a red flag warning. It's a threefold problem. It's sustained winds, it's very low relative humidity, usually less than 15%, and then of course, very dry vegetation. You put in those three factors and make sure those red flag conditions, and there was a period of time late last night into early this morning where those red flag conditions were being met in northeastern Sonoma County.
Right, so it was a terrible time for a fire to start, and as we saw, it grew rapidly and it's putting out a ton of smoke. So I want to shift a little bit to the current conditions.
Yes.
So now we're going to look at a map of the current weather observations. And Jeff, I'll let you take over here to talk a little bit about where the fire is, what the winds and the relative humidity are.
If you can see the plus sign on your screen, this is generally where the fire is. Here's Geyserville. These little barbs right here is the wind direction and wind speed. So these winds right here, the Cobb Ridge West site from PG&E, they're coming out of the northeast. Conversely, Geyserville, winds are light and coming out of the south-southwest. Red numbers, those are wind gusts. Green numbers, these are relative humidity values. And again, keep in mind, 15% or below for relative humidity, one of the factors, critical factors we look at for explosive wildfire growth known as those red flag conditions. You can see these winds right now, a far cry, Patrick, from where they were earlier this morning.
That's right. So winds have weakened, but the fire is still continuing to grow. Conditions are still very dry, which is probably helping the fire growth as we speak. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the smoke forecast, because we talked about all of that smoke transport off to the Pacific from the offshore winds, but what's going to happen going forward? So now we're going to look at the HRRR model. So let me load the near surface smoke loop. So I'm going to pause this really quick.
I can walk through it here, Patrick.
Okay, so right now we're looking at, this is about, 11 a.m. this morning, and the colors there represent the concentration of particulate matter in micrograms. We don't have the scale, it's at the bottom, but just know that it's correctly pointing out the offshore smoke transport. So again, this is a model. It's a very high resolution model. What we're going to do is step it forward for the next couple of days, I think, or at least the next 24 hours.
Yeah, let's give people an idea of where this smoke is going to be heading as we go into tonight and into tomorrow. Do want to point out very quickly that this HER smoke model does tend to overdo concentrations just a bit with smoke. I do want to point that out. It can run a little bit hot, but at least we can get a general sense of where the smoke is heading. So again, this is model Worldland at 11 o'clock this morning. So here's noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Here's 2, 3, 4. So there's 5 o'clock this evening. You can see some of that smoke now drifting a little bit down the Sonoma coast. So this is 5 o'clock this evening. Let's go to 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. And you can see the smoke plume, Patrick, beginning to drift a little further south. And now we're talking about some of that smoke drifting into places like, I'd say Windsor, Healdsburg, certainly. And now you're talking about northern portions of Santa Rosa. And as you go through time here, and we're getting into now early tomorrow morning, this is 5 o'clock in the morning. I want to point out Sonoma County. You can see right there, that smoke beginning to drift into portions of southern Sonoma County.
And into Marin.
And into Marin County as well. So we're talking about some impacts from smoke heading as far south as San Rafael and Novato.
The timing is bad for this smoke transport to be going south over Sonoma County and Marin because it's overnight. And as Jeff mentioned earlier, overnight the temperature's cool. Sometimes you can get a temperature inversion, and that will trap the smoke in the lower parts of the atmosphere and increase those particle concentrations higher than what they would be maybe during the middle of the day or the afternoon. So again, the timing here is bad with this transport over our area. It's overnight into the early morning hours.
This is 18Z tomorrow, which translates to 11 o'clock in the morning on Friday, and you can see that smoke is still lingering across a good portion of the North Bay, extending all the way as far east as Yolo and Solano counties as well. And I think as we're getting into tomorrow afternoon, winds become a little more westerly, and perhaps the smoke begins to pull a bit away from Sonoma County and the North Bay.
That's right. We're not showing it here, but there could be transport out of Sonoma County on Saturday, and that might help our air quality situation.
Yes. So Patrick, go ahead, talk about the Spare the Air alert that was issued by Bay Area.
So the Bay Area Air Quality Management District issued a Spare the Air alert for the entire region for tomorrow. That's Friday. They have air AQI levels that are unhealthy for sensitive groups forecast for the northern zone today. So this is a result of the smoke transport from the Kincade fire. And it looks like going forward after Friday, they have a moderate AQI forecast, but that situation might change depending on the smoke transport, the accumulation, and the fire behavior and just how much smoke it's putting out.
And potentially new fires that could be popping up as well. And if you want to get the updated forecast for the Bay Area for air quality, sparetheair.org. Want to make sure we point that out to those watching. All right, let's go into the weekend because, Patrick, we are talking about another high impact event and maybe a more widespread impact event for winds. And what you have pulled up here is the PG&E weather awareness page.
So as many of you probably know, now when we have high wind events forecast, PG&E has been doing public safety power shutoffs to prevent the likelihood or lower the likelihood of fires being sparked by power lines that are downed. So this actually is a good indicator, not just for when your power is going to go out, but when you can expect high winds. So we can see that we're currently in a PSPS warning. That's today for zones 2, 3, 4, 5, and 9. 2, 3, 4, 5, and way to the south, 9. But we wanted to highlight this period Sunday into Monday, really, because there's another event coming. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is going to produce that next high wind event.
Do want to point out very quickly before you go to the next tab here that there hasn't been a PSPS watch or PSPS warning issued as of Thursday afternoon for the upcoming weekend. I will say, though, that confidence is increasing as we're heading into Sunday and Monday for some portions, maybe a large portion of northern central California that are PG&E customers that will not have power. So let's go to the maps. I want to go ahead and show the overall wind pattern here. This is 9 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. We're showing you what's called a 500 millibar map. This is the upper level winds, and we can really get an idea of the pattern that's driving this next potential high fire danger.
So 500 millibars is about 18,000 feet above the surface. So this is sort of mid to upper level atmosphere. These are not surface winds, but the dominant pattern here is the upper level trough of low pressure, which is indicated by this circulation here.
Okay, and what's important to point out with this is the European model that we're showing here on Windy for early on Sunday morning. And with that trough dropping down, note that it's inland, so you're not tapping into a lot of moisture, and you have that offshore wind component as well. Now, I want to point out something that's really kind of incredible about the European model. They've been hinting at this pattern for about a week now. A week's worth of time has gone by here where this European model has been indicating this high impact fire danger for the upcoming weekend heading into Sunday and Monday. Patrick, go ahead, click on the GFS model because that's coming into agreement, but it's only coming into agreement or has been coming into agreement with the European model only in the last couple of days here. The GFS model has been very slow to catch up to this pattern. So as we see the models aligning more, agreeing more, that's when our forecast confidence increases and kind of gets us aware to start prepping for the potential for power shutdowns.
Right, so the last thing I want to do here is go down to the surface. So as I said before, we're at 500 millibars here, about 18,000 feet above ground level. So I'm going to drop down to the surface winds now, and I'm going to zoom in here on our area, and I'm going to put up the wind gusts.
And one more thing I'm going to do as well here, Patrick, is I'm going to put on the forecasted weather, and that's going to indicate the wind gust speeds for the North Bay.
Right, so the dominant pattern here again, offshore pressure gradient producing these offshore winds, which translates into sort of a northeasterly wind over northern Sonoma County. You can see here for these particular sites, these are the wind gusts, 37 miles per hour, 37, 38, 49 over some of the higher terrain. So this is another situation where we are very concerned about rapid fire growth and obviously smoke transport over our region.
A couple of weeks ago, we went through a widespread public safety power shutdown from PG&E. And this pattern, to me, is a little more defined for an even more widespread event in regards to wind. And what I mean by that is if you think back to the early portion of October, that first widespread power shutdown for the Bay Area, it wasn't windy down at the surface. The winds were contained into the higher elevations. This has potential, this system heading into the weekend, starting late Saturday night, continuing into Sunday and early on Monday, where some of these wind gusts, 30, even 40 miles per hour, may translate all the way down to the lower elevations here in the North Bay.
Right, and that would obviously contribute to fire danger all the way down into lower elevations. So we will be watching this next system closely, and we will be evaluating what the potential is for smoke transport if there's any fire. But we've got our eye on this situation, and obviously we are tracking smoke impacts from the Kincade fire throughout this week. That might be a factor for several days, even into next week.
Yeah, very much so. And of course, a very concerning pattern as we are heading into the upcoming weekend. We appreciate you listening and watching this emergency podcast. Again, my name is Jeff Beamish.
And I'm Patrick Zahn.
Thanks for watching the update from Sonoma Technology.